Hey everyone, welcome back to the farm. We're in the shop working on the Farmall H today. It's a little bit snowy and cold outside. Yeah, a little bit more cold and snowy, but nonetheless. So the other day I came home from work and there was a package sitting on the front porch from Steiner Tractor Parts. In this box should be every gasket and seal that I need to reassemble the rear end of the Farmall H. The only thing this is lacking is the outer axle bearings. I got to get those coming yet. But other than that, we should be able to make some forward progress on this rear end now. Since the last video, I took the liberty of assembling the front end of the transmission. I got the new seals in place, gaskets with some aviation sealant. I like using that stuff just to make sure that everything's good and sealed. We're not going to have any leaks anywhere. I got the drive coupler on and installed all the way with the bolt in it. So that part's all good to go. Now we're ready to move on to the rear differential assembly and bull pinion housings. Your bull pinion assembly is made up of three main pieces. You have the bull pinion housing. There's shims on here, and I'll explain what those are for later. You have your bull pinion gear, and then you have your brake drum. So this is your bull pinion shaft. There's three main parts to it. You have your differential splines into the side gears of your differential. This is your brake drum splines into the brake drum that's mounted on the outside of the transmission housing. Then you have your row of teeth which engage on the bull gears, which in turn are mounted to your axles. So before we can put these assemblies in the tractor, there's two main things we got to make sure of, seal and O-ring wise. This is the O-ring that seals the outer housing to the brake drum. Now before, originally this came with a seal that was probably 3/4 of an inch thick, and it was a double lip seal. Now they don't make them anymore, and what a lot of guys do is they'll actually double up these single lip seals and put two of them in there. I'm not doing that. I've had pretty good luck with just replacing them, with one seal. Just try to pay attention to where the seal's riding on the brake drum, and I've never had a problem doing that, so that's what we're going to do. But I usually test fit them just to make sure it's correct, and it is. On the drum, same thing here. So that's one thing we have to test fit. The next thing is, if I flip this upside down, you'll see, and it is kind of hard to see, there's a groove down here, and that groove takes an O-ring that seals the bull pinion housing to the transmission housing. Keeps oil from leaking out. So if I get one of these seals out, get it open. I know through Steiner they offered two different ones, and I actually had to measure, make sure I was getting the right one, and it's pretty obvious of which one you need because there really are two different sizes. But I'm going to roll this seal or this O-ring over, get it down here, somewhat get it in place. So now it's important to make sure you have all these shims down far enough and they're not in the groove, so when you roll that O-ring in place, it doesn't catch a shim and prevent the O-ring from going down in the groove. So we're good there. So that O-ring fit nice. So now we got the O-rings in place. We got these single lip seals we're going to put in. First, before we put it in, I like to use a little bit of Vaseline and pack this backside with Vaseline. Helps keep the spring in place so that doesn't pop off. I like using Vaseline over grease because the Vaseline, once the oil heats up, it'll actually dissolve the Vaseline and it just kind of mixes it with the oil and eventually goes away. We've been using it on hydraulics forever. It's all I've ever used. Wipe the excess Vaseline off the outside. So that's as far as we're gonna drive that seal in for now. Later on, when we go to put the drum on, I'll get a piece of pipe that'll be the same diameter as the seal and drive it in to where I'm gonna want it to ride on the drum, on the sealing surface of the drum. Well, we got the bull pinion housings all assembled. We got the shafts in them, the seals and O-rings. I did put a little bit of Vaseline on the O-rings. That's going to help the O-rings slide and seat into the transmission housing better than if they were dry. So, let's go get these things installed. Hey, and if you haven't hit that subscribe button in your lower right-hand corner of the screen, we'd ask you to do that. If you have subscribed, thank you very much. Our channel's been growing and we just really appreciate it. So we're going to start by installing this left-hand bull pinion housing. And we're only going to get it set in place. So now that we got the differential assembly partly installed in the rear end housing, we have it hanging off the end of the bull pinion shaft. Before we can slide this in the rest of the way, one thing I want to do is locate the bolt holes in the bull pinion housing to the bolt holes in the transmission housing. So that way when it goes in nice and straight and square and everything lines up. Well, that proved to be a little more difficult than I was expecting. But what happened was I was trying to get the differential assembly to slide in the bull pinion housing, this bearing, but it's such a precision fit. Every time I went to push on it and get it lined up, the bull pinion housing was actually pushing out. So I ended up getting it in far enough, getting some bolts started to hold it. Then I was able to stick my hand in from the side and wiggle the differential up and down and around to get it to go in as far as I can. Right now, the ring gear is up against the pinion gear. So now I need to run the bolts in for this bull pinion housing and get that one set. Then I can run the differential in all the way and then bring in the right-hand bull pinion housing and we should be good to go. So it's always important to pay attention to detail. I got the bolts just about tightened up and was looking inside the transmission housing, and then I realized something. The cutout for the bull gear in the bull pinion housing is actually pointed in the wrong direction. So I need to rotate the bull pinion housing clockwise one set of bolt holes and then it'll be in the right orientation. Well, now that I got that turned and oriented in the right direction, let's try this again. Pretty important that you draw these bolts in evenly a little time, because otherwise if you get this thing off kilter in the housing, next thing you know you're breaking an ear off on the housing here. So it's very imperative that you draw this thing in nice and straight and square. That's why I'm not using an impact and I'm using a ratchet, because I can feel it as I go to tighten it up. So now that I got the bull pinion housing set in place, you can see the bearing still sticking out. We got a gap in here with the ring gear. Just gonna wiggle this in and out until the bearing's seated. There. So now we can install the right hand bull pinion housing, getting the splines engaged with the side gear and not making the same mistake twice, making sure my orientation for the cutout for the bull gear is in the right orientation. Line this up with a bar, make sure all the shims are in the right spot. We got that in as far as it'll go now. We'll install the bolts. And so according to my torque chart, this is supposed to be torqued to 49 foot-pounds. Well, there you have it, an installed differential and a Farmall H. If you're interested in the internal workings of a differential, I did a video a while back of tearing this one apart. So I'll put a link to that video in the description below. So go ahead and check it out and see how they work. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to put some legs on this thing. I got the axle housings all cleaned up and I have new gaskets for it. So I'm going to put the gasket up here. I don't want to clean this whole surface off. I painted. So I'm going to put the gasket up here just to kind of give me an idea of what I need to clean. Looks like I'm just going to end up cleaning around this inner gasket surface here. And I'll probably also clean down around this lower hole because this is a drain hole back into the transmission housing. These holes that the bolts that hold the axle housing in are blind holes, so I don't really have to worry about oil seeping through to them. So we're going to get this cleaned up and then we can install some axles. So I got this sealing surface all cleaned up. I'm happy with that. And I also took the liberty of cleaning up the axle housing. So now I'm going to add just a little bit of this aviation sealant to the inside of this axle housing, just for a little bit of reassurance. Now I'm going to set the paper gasket down on this and get the bolt holes oriented in the correct location. Do the same thing. So I got the sealant on this part on the axle housing itself. I'm going to put just a little bit around this hole just to make sure that that's good and sealed. I don't want a ton of this stuff oozing out where you're going to see it, or I got to paint over it, clean it up and paint over it. But I just want a little bit of reassurance. Well, now we ought to be able to take this axle housing and hopefully slide it home. There, we got that most of the way in. See if our bolt holes line up. Well, we got all the bolts installed, so let's see if we can get this thing drawn in evenly. Well, we got that axle housing bolted in place. Now we're going to give the other side the same treatment. So one thing I find worth mentioning, the International did really well, was they put their part numbers and date codes on a lot of their major casting components. So on this left-hand axle housing, this is the part number that you would have used to look up in the book. And I know this, the suffix with the DA, they had different, if they made a design change, they necessarily wouldn't change the main part number, but they changed the last two designations to designate a change in the part. Well, we definitely got some progress made today. We got the differential and bull pinion housings back in. I do have to do the backlash, check the backlash between the ring gear and the pinion gear, but we'll get that done here in the next video or so. Definitely before we put the bull gears and stuff in. But I wanted to get the axle housings on. It was kind of bugging me a little bit. Just wanted to start making it look like a tractor again. So we got that done. So I'm good, happy about that. We got to get the outer axle bearings coming. I haven't figured them out where I'm getting them from yet, but we'll get those coming. Then we get the axles back in it, bull gears, and then put the top cover back on. So I think that's going to be it for the video. If you like our video, please give it a thumbs up. If you like our channel, please subscribe. And we hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time.